Good morning, everyone. I want to talk with you about trust. But first, I want to ask you something that everybody here should be able to answer, and that's, who is the adversary? You know, you're all about cybercrime here, so, you know the names of the adversary, the people that we struggle against, the APT ones, the cozy bears, the frenetic penguins, or whatever they're being called, the mage cart people, organized crime, even the auditors. I want to see what Brian says to that. Actually, there are organizations that will treat the auditor as more of a believable adversary than the hacker, because they've never really seen a black hat hacker, but they have sat across the table in a boardroom from an auditor. So the auditor is the most likely adversary that they have to deal with. And that's why it's much easier to get money for compliance risk management than it is for any other kind of risk management. So we know who the adversary is. Now I'm going to ask you, who's the other adversary? And I love people usually in the audience are sitting there going, is it me? Am I the adversary? Let me give you a hint as to who the other adversary is. I asked some people on Twitter to give me their most cynical quotes about security vendors. And Adrian Sanabria, got right to the point. I forget who he was referring to when he was saying this to me, but he said they're basically the mafia of InfoSec. Here are some other good ones. The vendor where good software goes to die. I don't know who that is, but you probably have some ideas. Or they're out to solve all the world's problems $1 billion at a time. Ouch, that kind of hurts. But this is my favorite one. Vendors are like Scooby-Doo villains, constantly trying to convince us that there are werewolves so they can sell us silver bullets. And that's fair, okay? I'll admit to that. I am a Scooby-Doo villain. It was old lady Nather the whole time. And I would have gotten away with it, too, if it hadn't been for you meddling kids. No, the actual adversary, the other adversary that we're trying to deal with is the lack of trust. The lack of trust, as you know, those of you who work in threat intel, the lack of trust keeps us from being able to share threat intelligence. When I used to work for the Retail Intelligence Sharing and Analysis Center, I was always working to bring people together. Everybody wanted to contribute their threat intel anonymously. But the problem with anonymous threat intelligence is that somebody always has a question about it, and they want to find out who it is so they can ask more follow-up questions. So somebody would come to me and say, that thing that was just contributed, we have a question about it. Can you convince them to decloak so that we can talk to them? So I would go over to the other organization and say, hey, Target has some questions for you. Is it okay if I tell them who you are? And they say, okay, yeah, we like Target. Sure, we'll talk to them. And so I would go back to Target and say, okay, let me put you together. So I spent a lot of time doing that, convincing these organizations to trust one another. Because without it, you really can't share good threat intelligence. Anonymous threat intel sharing really doesn't work all that well. Another thing is that it prevents us from knowing what the real problems are. If you are a consultant, for example, and your customers won't tell you that they're coming to you only because they just had a breach, and it's only going to be another 3 months, and if you don't sell your solution to them in 3 months, the budget's going to go away again because their management will be over the breach. They have to be able to tell you where the real problems are, and they won't do that if they don't trust you. It also prevents us from working together to solve these problems. And this is a particular problem in the security industry because we are always taking pot shots at one another. There are, and Brian is laughing because there are whole career paths inside of InfoSec where your job day in and day out is basically to say, ooh, you missed a spot. Right there. People pointing out vulnerabilities and problems and everything, and this is the reason why more practitioners don't get on the stage, because if they talk about why security is working for them, everybody will be ready to take a shot at them right afterwards. And of course, they can't come up here and talk about why security's not working, because that's really embarrassing. So we don't get to hear from a large portion of the community because of the lack of trust. And for people who want to get into security as a career, it's very intimidating because you're afraid that if you come up here and talk about what you're doing, you're going to get hacked. And again, I'm no exception to this rule. Anybody remember Chris Roberts? The gentleman who claimed to have hacked the United Airlines flight, mid-flight, and made it fly sideways? Well, I hacked him. It was at a conference, I think it was in Denver, there was drinking going on, and he was showing us pictures on his unlocked phone, and I said, "Oh, can I see?" And he gave me his phone, and he forgot that I was holding his phone, so I just took a selfie and posted it to Twitter for him, just as a reminder. Did the same thing to Rob Graham, Errata Rob. We were presenting together at DEF CON, and I said to him, "Oh, I didn't bring my laptop for my presentation. Can I borrow yours? I just brought my presentation on this little USB stick." And he said, "Oh, sure," and he plugged it in. Yes. So, this can happen to anybody because nobody sees the middle-aged former state bureaucrat and mother of two coming. I am not in your threat model. So, as long as we're doing this to one another, we don't have the trust that we need to be able to solve these problems together. And before I go any further, talking about trust, as soon as I say the word trust, somebody inevitably says blockchain. Please don't say blockchain. Any blockchain fans in the audience? I'm sorry, you can fight me later. But blockchain is not the answer to all of our trust issues, and I'll talk about why. Are you disappointed, Brian? Yeah. Yeah, bitterly disappointed. Don't say blockchain. But what do we need to earn trust? Well, one thing that we don't talk enough about is trustworthy user interface design. Here's an example of what not to do. I don't know if you can see this yellow circle here. This is a mobile phone banner ad. And inside the yellow circle is a little, did I just shake the thing there? It was the projector. Wow, that's cool. Wow. Oh, there we go. Inside of this little yellow circle is a smudge that is supposed to look like a smudge on your screen. And so what you'll do is you'll try to scrape it off and it'll click on the banner ad and they get the money. Isn't that diabolical? There are more subtle ways to do malicious design, or as they call them, dark patterns. There's a great site called darkpatterns.org where you can see examples of malicious user interface design. There are things like bait and switch, where you think you're signing up for one thing and you end up signing up for the other thing, or you end up with things in your cart that you didn't expect to see there. There's confirm shaming. Everybody has seen that, especially when you're buying plane tickets, where they ask if you want to buy travel insurance. And it says, you have to either accept the travel insurance or deny it. And if you don't want it, it says, "No, I choose not to protect my investment." That's confirm shaming. Or, "Yes, I want to let the orphans starve." Click. The Roach Motel, where, people check in, but they can't check out again. There's a way to manipulate workflows when you're doing something online and you expect to be able to go in a certain order. And if you can't get back out again, you're kind of stuck in the work stream. And then there are trick questions like this one. Do you want to cancel? Yes. Wait, cancel. No, cancel. Which one do I click on to cancel? I'm not sure. These sort of really confusing things are what we have to deal with all the time. Now, some of them are on purpose and some of them aren't. There's the abuse of what we have been conditioned to understand as intuitive user interfaces. For example, the radio buttons that you click on the screen, we're used to the fact that generally, if you choose one radio button and then choose another one, you only get one choice in the list. So if you click on a different radio button, it gets rid of your original choice. That's different than with tick boxes, where you can often choose more than one choice. And as we go through and use these things, we get conditioned to expect things to behave a certain way. but a dark pattern can misuse that expectation. So my oldest, when he was about 3 or 4, before he could even read, we used to let him sit in front of the computer and go on the web and play on kids' websites. And one day my husband and I came in and we found him sitting in front of the computer, and he was in the middle of downloading and installing a browser plugin. And we thought, my daughter doesn't realize I talk about her brother on stage. So we figured out what must have happened was that even though he couldn't read, he got used to the fact that when a pop-up would come up, it would have 2 little boxes on it, and one of them would be outlined darker than the other one. That was the default choice. And he must have discovered that if he clicked on it, it would make the pop-up go away, and he could go back to what he was doing. So even at a very young age, our kids are being conditioned through user interface design to expect and to do certain things, to take certain actions. If you color things red in the United States or here, it usually means danger. But in China, red stands for good fortune. So if you're trying to drive somebody away from a certain choice or you're trying to alert them to danger, which color are you going to use? In any case, the goal of the malicious design is to cause a user to make a mistake that's not in their best interest, to make a security decision that's not good for them. The problem with malicious design is that it's not necessarily extra code. It's not malware. So if you're doing a code review, you might not spot it. You might have to be a user interface designer to look at it and say, this is so bad, this has got to be on purpose. Because the other problem is that we often have very bad, what I call engineering grade, user interface design. As an industry analyst, I saw hundreds and hundreds of demos, some of them with really bad user interface designs. And so we're all being conditioned to expect that sort of design. Here's another example. Have you ever started to fill out a form on a screen and thought, oh, I can't walk away from this because the session will time out and then I will lose all my work on that form? People end up doing that. So you start getting this low level of anxiety whenever you start to fill out a form and you think, I have to finish it right now. Here's another example. Right now, how many of you, in the back of your head, all day long, are thinking about and worrying about the battery life on your phone? It's in there now, isn't it? Now that I've put it in your head. It's starting to itch in the back of your head, and you want to go, oh, no, I'm not going to look. I'm not going to look. 63%. This is a sort of low-level anxiety, this almost subconscious anxiety that we are now living with that we didn't have 20 or 30 years ago. And this sort of anxiety can be exploited. It can be used against us. The other thing is that 20 or 30 years ago, when I started in this field, it was a very small community. It was a bunch of people who had the same general level of knowledge. They had the same career paths. They all understood the same thing. So it was possible to say, oh, that's intuitively obvious. And everybody understood what you meant because everybody had the same level of knowledge. But now we write for the world. And we cannot expect that everybody understands the same things that we do. You know, it should be, more ideally like a spoon. If you go anywhere in the world and you pick up a spoon, you know how to use it. You learn as a little kid, and it doesn't take very long to learn how to use a spoon. But it's designed so that you don't pick it up wrong, at least not very often. You do when you're a toddler for a couple of times, but then you learn how to hold it properly. It's designed so that you know how to use it. Wouldn't it be great if we could design security the same way so that it would be really hard to use wrong? You don't have to have annual awareness campaigns for spoons. Yeah. And so this is the sort of thing that we need to take on as a challenge, to figure out how to design security so that it is as hard to get wrong as a spoon, so that we're not shaming users for using it wrong. It should be easy for everybody, no matter their level of background. So what do we need to earn trust? We need things like transparency. We need to be able to talk more about what's going on behind the scenes of an application so that it is predictable for the user. When the user clicks on it, they should know what's going to happen. They should know what's happening to their data. And that's why I am going to say on this stage, in front of all these people, thank goodness for GDPR. Yay, I really am, because it is causing people to look at what they have and why they have it. This is very, very important. We need the willingness to correct mistakes, which is another problem that we have with breach disclosure in particular. To say, no, we meant to do that, And we need empathy. Empathy is probably the most important quality we need in order to earn trust, because we need to understand our users. At Duo, we have a whole bunch of design researchers who spend a lot of time talking to the users of our software, and they build personas, different types of users. For example, we have Helen, the CISO. We have Lee, the end user. We have Gary, the IT admin. And we talk to a lot of them to build a persona around what their most critical concerns are, why they use our software. And I asked one of our designers, one of our researchers, I said, what's the most shocking thing that you found out when you were interviewing users? And the answer will shock you. The answer is that Gary, the IT admin, doesn't actually want to use our product. He really doesn't. Our users don't want to use our product. Yes, I would like a couple of extra steps in my login process. I would really like some multi-factor authentication. Can I sign up for that? Can I have 3 extra steps? Yeah, nobody wants that. So they're not going to be impressed by the bells and whistles that we put into our product. They don't want to use it. Gary, the IT admin, is using it as a remediation tool. He wants to get in, solve a problem, and get back out again. He does not want to spend time admiring everything that we put into it. So this is our Gary, the IT admin. He does not want to use our product. And the question is, how do you design for somebody who doesn't want to use your product? How do you design a product if you are a necessary evil? Duo, the necessary evil. I don't think that works as a marketing message. So how do you build trust while getting out of the way in your design? Does everybody know what this is? You've seen this a lot, right? You sit there, you wait for something that's going to be loading. This is actually my brain on jet lag. It's loading. This is also the loading screen for the app Duolingo. I don't know if anybody else uses it, but I use it to study language, different languages. I've tried to learn Irish. It was very, very hard. You guys are a bunch of smart people. I don't know how do you speak Irish. But they had this loading screen when it's loading the lesson, and they would have some trivia at the bottom, like one of the trivia bits that they have is actually that they claim that there are more Duolingo students of Irish than there are native Irish speakers. I don't know if that's true or not. But anyway, you would just sit there waiting for it to load, and I would be going, yes, yes. And finally, recently, they changed it to a little dancing owl. And I wish I could have gotten the animated GIF, because it's got its little feet going and, its eyes are rolling and little notes are coming out. And I knew exactly why they were doing it. The lesson wasn't loading any faster. But they had empathy that I was going to be bored waiting for this to load. And so they came up with this, and I appreciated it. It was a nice gesture on their part. So we did the same thing with Duo. There was one step in a process that we just could not get any faster. I think there was a third-party integration or something like that. And so what we did was we set up a little animated graphic here to show the user exactly what to do at this point, which is nice because if you only have the words use your security key, who knows what that means? Where is that on the laptop? Did I leave my security key in my pocket? I don't know what the security key is. But this shows you exactly what it is, and it shows you exactly where to tap on it. Because if any of you have used the YubiKey, I don't know if you realize this, but if you have dry skin like I do on my fingers, you don't have the conductivity necessary to activate the key. So I always have to lick my finger and tap the YubiKey to do my second factor of authentication. So just lick and tap. And they don't teach you that in onboarding. Lick your finger and tap. And now I'm going to make sure that nobody ever touches my YubiKey. Ever again. So this sort of thing is how you can build trust, because the user says, yes, I can see that the designer appreciates that, this is hard. We want to give them the information that they need exactly when they need it, but no more than that, and then get out of their way. And making it efficient is what's going to help. Now, what about zero trust? I was practicing this talk in a training class a couple of weeks ago, and one of my colleagues, as soon as I said the word zero trust, he did this. He went, ah. Is anybody tired of hearing the word zero trust already? Anybody? Oh, good. Let me see if I can fix that. What about zero trust? I think, now, that there's a lot of discussion about what zero trust really means. And I think it's going to be like cloud used to be. You know how we used to sit around and argue about what real cloud was? I think that's going to happen with zero trust. Like somebody will come out with a zero trust printer and will say, that's not how zero trust works. And they'll say, yes, it is. But for me, I think it's not about getting rid of the perimeter. It's about making the classic perimeter less lonely. Because we've known for a long time that this is not a good model. Having just one perimeter on the network, and once you get in, it's game over. We've seen a lot of examples of how this has failed. There were the nation-state Aurora attacks. There was the Target breach. And by the way, I feel bad about using the Target breach, because after this breach, Target got really good at security. They turned everything around. In fact, they're now a role model for other retailers. They even give tours of their SOC. I've been in there. So it's really not fair to use them anymore. It's just that everybody's heard of the breach. But basically, pretty much any insider can move laterally if you only have an external perimeter and you're not checking anything afterwards. Because pretty much a sufficiently successful attacker looks exactly like an insider. I heard one story about a sysadmin whose credentials were compromised, and the attacker came in from the sysadmin's home machine, which is what you would expect the sysadmin to do, to be working remotely. They came in through the VPN, which again you would expect the sysadmin to be doing. They went straight to a domain controller. Again, sysadmins do that. The only difference was that the attacker had changed their keyboard to Chinese. That's the only way that they knew that it was an attacker. So this is the sort of thing that you can get caught by if you only have one external perimeter. So how do we address that risk? There are a lot of different ways. The Jericho Forum group of financial services CISOs in the UK started talking about this in the late 90s and early 2000s. And they described this, what they call the solution, as deperimeterization, which you absolutely cannot pronounce after 3 pints, which is why I think that phrase never caught on. Because I remember looking at it and saying, this is a great idea, but I don't know how I would do this. And then John Kindervag, when he was at Forrester, came up with the phrase zero trust, which is much easier to say at 3 a.m. Right, Brian? 3 a.m, zero trust. Yeah, I think that's why it has caught on as pretty much the term of art these days to describe the same thing. Then Google went and implemented it. It took them 7 years and hundreds of engineers and all sorts of money, but they implemented this model, this architectural model, and they called it BeyondCorp. So this is what Google's diagram of their BeyondCorp architecture looks like, and I won't make you stare at it for too long, but just to say that there are some important elements to it that are common to pretty much every implementation of it. There's a centralized access proxy that you have to come through no matter where you're coming from. So no matter whether you're on an external network or an internal network, everybody goes through the access proxy. Everybody has information on the state of their device that's taken into account when deciding whether to grant them access or not. And the same thing with Intel. They came up with a very similar model that they call Beyond the Edge. So you can see BeyondCorp, Beyond the Edge. You can tell the trend here going beyond. But again, they also have a centralized access proxy. They have information about the state of their device and everything that's being brought together to decide with every authentication whether to grant access or not, based on the risk at that particular time. But basically, we all agree that you should not trust something or somebody just because they're on the inside of your firewall. Now, how you solve that is another issue. And I'm always trying to come up with new analogies to describe how this would work. So, for example, let's pretend this is a club, and the gentleman at the back is the bouncer. He's the firewall. Now, the bouncer's letting people in for one set of reasons. And if I were the bartender standing at the bar and you let somebody in, when somebody came to me, I would say, well, I don't care why the bouncer let you in. If you want to drink, if you want to access my service, I'm going to have to see some ID, because that's my policy. So if you go to the nacho table, I don't care. They have a different policy for the nacho table. You don't need ID for that. You don't need to be 21 for queso. But if you come to access this particular application, you're going to need some ID. So this is the analogy that I use that seems to resonate with a lot of people, especially our salespeople. I don't know why. It's a mystery as to why they relate to it so much. But anyway, this is an easy way to think about it. So it shouldn't matter where they are or where the application is, whether it's internal or whether it's an external SaaS app. They should get the same checks regardless. And incidentally, this also gives the users a more consistent login experience, which they really appreciate. They don't have to think about, oh gosh, where's that application? Do I have to fire up the VPN? Okay, I'm going to use that app later. I'm going to go do something else instead. They should be able to go to the same single sign-on experience and do the same things, regardless of where the app is and regardless of where they are. But what does zero trust really mean? And this is where I get into arguments with John Kindervag. I believe that he refers to the word trust and zero trust as something one way, and I think about it another way. And I think the differences are semantic. And he says, no, it's not semantics. I think it's totally semantics. Because the way he describes trust, he describes it as granting access without verification, which I agree with you, you really shouldn't do. But if you think of trust as granting access because you verified, that's a very different way of thinking about it, which is why you'll also hear references to trusted access. I don't think it's a good idea to talk about zero trust as if you should never trust anything. I don't think it's practical, because you need to trust your users in order to let them have access for, any certain amount of time. The other thing is that trust is neither binary nor is it permanent. So when you trust something or somebody, you don't trust them to do just anything. My team will trust me to get up on stage and talk to you, but they will not trust me to do a deployment because I have a talent for breaking things. So you will trust somebody or something to do one particular thing or a few particular things, and it's not permanent. Your trust is going to erode over time based on whether you think the risk is growing. For example, if a new release of software comes out that's patched a vulnerability, until they update their software, your estimation of their risk is going to go up because the chances are greater as time goes by that they're going to be using a compromised device, and you probably care about that. So it's all about deciding what you want to trust somebody to do and for how long, and what factors have to go into it to make you trust them. And those factors can be different, as we saw with the bar analogy, depending on the criticality of the application. So it's a much more nuanced way of looking at access than just using a firewall and saying, okay, you came from this IP address, welcome in, have fun storming the castle, I'll see you later. But if you think of the perimeter, the perimeter's not going away. Nobody's getting rid of their firewalls. But if you think of the perimeter as anywhere where you make an access control decision, then you have some very interesting scenarios that you can think about. This is a chart from Sunil Yu at Bank of America, and he describes all the different opportunities that you have for authentication from a device, for example, to an application. You might be using a client-side TLS certificate. And this chart is available on the web. If you Google for Sunil Yu and cyber defense matrix, you should be able to find his slides with this. But there are a lot of different ways to authenticate from one layer to another. You could do all of them, but there's one problem with this. Does anybody spot the problem in this matrix? It's those pesky users. If you make them authenticate over and over again, first to their device, then to the app, then to the network, they're going to get very cranky. So the problem is that you need to consolidate as many of these authentications as possible or hide them from the user, which is why WebAuthn has become such a popular project. Getting rid of passwords is a really popular project. If we can hide a lot of this authentication from the users, they're going to be a lot happier. Now, if it's container to container or system to system, you can authenticate as many times as you want with every request that you want, and they don't care. But it's those users who are going to get very cranky if you make them authenticate too often. That's the problem with zero trust. If you never trust your users, they are never going to use what you build for them. So we can reinforce trust in a lot of ways. First of all, through prevention, through well-understood processes and protection of data. Obviously, we need to have a lot of detection and visibility and monitoring. We need to be able to see what the security state of the devices are that our users are using at any given time and decide whether to grant them access. But the other thing we need to be able to do to earn trust is to correct mistakes. And this is where, I'm sorry, blockchain falls down. If you have something immutable, you cannot correct it. So, and if it's one thing we know about humans is we make mistakes all the time. We need to be able to do corrections in a trustworthy way, in a well-understood way, and we need to be able to do those on a regular basis. So this is the combination that we need in order to build trust. So yes, we need to be able to build things with continuous authentication, but hide as much as that as we can from the users. We need data validation, even more data validation than we have today. We need monitoring and transparency, and we need the ability to correct. What we do not need is to hash all the things. Because as tasty as hash is, it's not going to solve our problems. Now, here's a conclusion that I came to when I was building this talk originally, and I don't know whether it's right or not. And you can tell me afterwards if you think I'm wrong. But I believe that it is not possible to build a trustworthy system that stays trustworthy regardless of who's using it. In other words, you have to be able to trust the people who built the system, the ones who are maintaining the system, and the ones who are using the system. You cannot build something that is robust enough to be trustworthy in a vacuum. But again, I know we've tried to work on this for years, for decades. People have tried to do mathematical assurances of software. We keep chasing this holy grail. I don't think we can get there because I think our technology is too complex at this point. But what this means is that being trustworthy does not start with the systems. It has to start with us. And it means that we have to work hard to get the community to trust one another. We have to be able to trust each other. We have to get users to trust us, our management to trust us, and so on. This is something that we all have to be able to do together. And absolutely, we should not start out by talking about never trusting anything, and we should not depict everybody as wearing hoodies. Because hoodies just scare everybody. I mean, they're very cool, but we really should be getting rid of our hoodies. Thank you.